If you heard a child crying alone on a frozen mountain road, would you stop or would you be too afraid? That morning, Harold Bates was driving back from his shift at the paper mill, headlights cutting through the snowfall like blades. The road was silent except for the hiss of sleet, the type of silence that creeps into your bones when you've spent many years alone. Harold, 68, had been widowed for 2 winters. Since Martha died, nothing had warmed him, not the firewood, not the coffee, not even his daughter's distant phone calls. He lived in a cabin built by his father, surrounded by trees that no longer whispered, they just watched. The only thing that stirred him now was routine, mill work, soup for one, then sleep. But that morning, just as dawn threatened to spill over the ridge, a sound pierced the hush. He braked suddenly. There on the edge of the icy road was a shape too small to be anything but human. And it was sobbing. Harold opened his door before his mind could catch up with his eyes. Snow crunched under his boots as he rushed to the figure. It was a little boy no older than 5, knees scraped, cheeks flushed, clothing soaked and far too thin for the brutal cold. He knelt down. Now, hey there. Where's your mama? The boy didn't answer. His lips were blue, his breath shallow. He only pointed toward the woods, trembling like a leaf. Harold followed the boy's finger and froze. Just beyond the first line of trees, shadows moved silent and deliberate. 1, 2, then 3. Wolves. Real wolves, not some coyote pack. They stood still, their eyes glowing amber in the morning frost. Harold instinctively stepped in front of the boy, but what happened next shattered everything he thought he knew about fear. The wolves didn't charge. They didn't growl. They didn't even blink. Instead, the largest one, an old silver-backed alpha, stepped forward and sat down, staring directly at Harold like he was trying to speak without a voice. Behind him, the others fanned out slowly, forming a circle around the child. The air turned thick. The boy, still crying softly, didn't flinch. He seemed familiar with them. This wasn't his first time. Harold's breath caught in his throat. What the hell's going on here? He muttered, backing up slightly, instinct screaming to run. But the boy tugged at his coat. Don't leave them, he whispered. They helped me. Harold blinked, heart pounding. Helped you? The boy nodded. They kept me warm. There were no tracks around the boy. No footprints in the snow except his own, and now Harold's. How long had he been out here? And why would wolves surround a child without harming him? Harold looked into the trees, then back at the boy. What's your name, son? The boy hesitated, then said, Eli. It was a soft, uncertain name. He hadn't heard it said in a while. Harold's brain was trying to work faster than his emotions could catch up. Eli's clothes were torn, his shoes mismatched, one soaked through entirely. He needed warmth, food, safety, but the wolves didn't budge as Harold reached down to lift the child. They stood guard protective, not aggressive, as if passing judgment. Just then, the silver wolf let out a deep, low rumble, not a growl, more like a warning. He stepped closer. Harold stiffened, shielding Eli, but the boy reached out a tiny hand and touched the wolf's muzzle gently. He saved me from the man, he said. Harold's stomach dropped. What man? Eli looked away, tears fresh again. The one who left me here. A silence thicker than snow fell between them. Harold didn't ask more. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, he looked back at the pack. Their eyes met his, ancient and unreadable. Then slowly, the wolves stepped back into the woods. All but one, the silver alpha. He stayed, watching. Harold knew he couldn't leave a child on the side of a freezing road. That part was simple, but bringing Eli home meant more than soup and blankets. It meant questions, police, maybe danger. And what about the wolf? Would he follow? Would he wait? Harold picked up the boy gently, surprised by how light he was. Eli wrapped his arms around Harold's neck with a sigh of exhaustion. Don't let them take me back, he mumbled. The old man didn't answer. He just carried the boy to the truck, his breath fogging the windshield as he started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the silver wolf still stood on the roadside, framed by the falling snow. Harold drove slowly, one eye on the road and one on the boy beside him. Eli dozed off almost immediately, his tiny body curling like a kitten's against the warmth of the truck's heater. Harold noticed bruises on the boy's wrist, the kind no 5-year-old should have. He swallowed hard, rage and sorrow mixing in his chest like oil and fire. When he reached the cabin, he parked carefully and looked again in the mirror. Nothing. The wolf was gone. Or so he thought. As he carried Eli inside, he saw paw prints in the snow leading to the porch and stopping there. Harold's breath caught again. The wolf had followed them home. Inside the cabin, Harold laid Eli on the old couch and stoked the fire until the room was bathed in orange warmth. He covered him with a wool blanket, then made a call first to the sheriff, then to a nurse he knew in town, but he didn't tell them everything. Not yet. He said he found a boy on the road. That was true. He said the boy was alone. That was almost true. The rest, he wasn't sure anyone would believe. While Eli slept, Harold stepped outside, drawn by a strange pull in his chest. Just at the edge of the trees, the silver wolf stood again, silent, watching, guarding. It wasn't fear Harold felt now, it was reverence. This creature, this beast, had protected a child more fiercely than any adult. Why, and how did they meet? The questions multiplied, but none were more urgent than one. Who would abandon a child in a place like this? And what kind of monster would leave him to die in a snowstorm? Harold stood in the cold a long time, not moving, not blinking. Finally, the wolf turned and padded back into the forest without a sound, as if reassured that his duty was done for now. Inside, Eli stirred, whispering in his sleep. Harold heard it clearly, "Papa Dot. Don't let him find me." That night, Harold didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, listening for sounds in the woods, heart wrapped around a child he didn't know but already felt bound to protect. He knew the sheriff would ask hard questions, so would social services. But deep down, he also knew this wasn't just about custody or care. It was about something older, something primal. That boy had survived because a predator had chosen mercy. Maybe even love, that changed things. As snow fell silently outside, Harold made a promise to no one in particular. "You're safe now, Eli. No one's ever gonna hurt you again." In the distance, a single, low howl answered. The morning brought a pale sun that barely warmed the frost-covered trees outside. Eli was still asleep, curled like a baby animal under the heavy wool blanket. Harold sat at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of bitter coffee, eyes fixed on the window. He expected the wolf to be gone, but just beyond the clearing, a flash of silver fur moved between the trees. It was no dream. The boy hadn't hallucinated it. And neither had he. The wolf had watched them all night. There was no aggression in his stance, only a strange, solemn stillness. Harold had seen a lot in his life: combat, factory accidents, even Martha's slow dying, but this primal bond between child and beast shook something loose in him, something he'd buried deep. He wasn't sure he wanted to dig it up. At noon, Eli woke up. His eyes opened slowly, wide and unsure, like someone who expected pain to return at any moment. Harold sat beside him and offered a bowl of oatmeal, warm with honey. The boy accepted it silently, spooning it into his mouth like he was used to rationing food. "Did you sleep okay?" Harold asked softly. Eli nodded. "The fire's warm." Then, after a long pause, "Is he still out there?" Harold followed his eyes to the window. "You mean the wolf?" Eli nodded again. "He always waits nearby. He doesn't let the bad man get close." Harold swallowed, unsure how to respond. Who was the man? Eli. The boy's mouth tightened, and he shook his head. He said not to tell. The boy had marks on his back, deep ones. Harold saw them when Eli's shirt slipped up as he reached for the oatmeal. Long, old scars. Not from the cold. Not from an accident. These were deliberate. That kind of cruelty leaves more than physical wounds, it teaches silence. And Eli had learned it well. Harold felt something rise in him, not anger but a deeper ache. He'd raised a daughter, he remembered scraped knees and monsters under the bed. But those monsters were imaginary, Eli's were real. They had names, and faces, and fists. Harold reached over and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything until you're ready, but you're safe now." "I promise." Eli looked at Harold with eyes that had seen too much. "You're not gonna give me back." The words hit Harold like a punch. "No, son. Not until we figure this out." For the first time, the boy relaxed slightly. He even offered a flicker of a smile. It lasted only a second, but it was something. Harold got up, poured himself more coffee, and peered out the window again. The Wolf was still there, sitting on the same rise, his ears perked, watching the house. Not pacing, not hunting, just watching. Why does he stay? Harold asked aloud. Eli sipped his oatmeal and replied without looking up, he made a promise to. The day passed slowly. Harold kept the fire going and tried to make the cabin feel less like a stranger's home. He brought out an old teddy bear from a box of Martha's things, cleaned it up, and set it on the couch next to Eli. The boy looked at it like it was some ancient treasure. What's his name? He asked. Used to be Henry, I think, Harold said. Belonged to my daughter when she was little. Eli hugged it tightly and didn't let go for the rest of the afternoon. Outside, the Wolf didn't move. Even when deer wandered through the edge of the forest, the silver figure remained still, eyes fixed on the cabin. It was as if he was guarding something sacred. By evening, the sheriff's car crunched up the icy driveway. Harold stepped out to meet him, pulling his coat tight. Sheriff Gable was a decent man, weathered by the job but not hardened. Got your call, he said, stepping onto the porch. Boy still inside, Harold nodded. Says his name's Eli. I didn't ask much, he's been through hell. The sheriff rubbed his chin, concerned. We've had a few missing kids over the years, but nothing reported lately. Could be one of those off-grid types. Or worse, he glanced toward the woods. You sure he was alone? Harold hesitated, then said, Not exactly. Gable raised an eyebrow. Come again, Harold just pointed toward the trees. He had company. Gable stepped off the porch and narrowed his eyes. When he spotted the Wolf just barely visible between the pines, he cursed softly. That's a damn big one. You sure it didn't hurt the boy? Harold shook his head. No, protected him. Stayed beside him all night. Boy said he saved him from whoever dumped him out there. The sheriff didn't speak for a moment. Then he muttered, You believe that? Harold didn't blink. I believe what I saw. And what I didn't see. That animal could have killed me if it wanted. But it didn't. The two men stood in silence as the wind whispered through the branches. Gable sighed. I'll file a report, but this one's strange. Inside, Eli sat on the couch with the teddy bear clutched to his chest, eyes wide as the sheriff walked in. He shrank back slightly, but Harold gave him a reassuring nod. It's okay. He's a friend. Gable knelt down, trying to meet the boy at eye level. Hey there, champ. I'm Sheriff Gable. You hungry? Eli glanced at Harold, who nodded. I ate, the boy whispered. All right, Gable said gently. Do you remember anything about where you came from? Any names, places? Eli shook his head slowly. I just remember trees, and cold. And the man. His voice broke on the last word, and he clutched the teddy bear tighter. Gable backed off. We'll talk later. No pressure. That night, Harold sat with Eli again, this time reading him a picture book he'd found in the attic. The boy didn't say much, but his body relaxed with each page. Outside, the snow had started falling again, blanketing the world in white silence. The Wolf was gone now, vanished into the woods like a ghost. But Harold knew he'd be back. Somehow, he just knew. He finished the book and looked down at Eli, whose eyes were already half closed. You're safe here, son, he whispered. The boy didn't answer, but his small hand reached out and grabbed Harold's sleeve before sleep pulled him under. Harold didn't move. He stayed like that for hours. As midnight approached, Harold stepped outside again. The cold slapped his face, but he welcomed it. There was clarity in the freeze, in the stillness. The stars were out sharp and endless. And on the ridge, the silver Wolf returned. He didn't come close. He didn't howl. He simply stood, backlit by the moon, like a sentinel in some forgotten legend. Harold raised a hand slowly, not expecting a response. But the Wolf lowered his head just once, a gesture of mutual understanding. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. Harold stood in the snow a long while, wondering what strange fate had brought the boy and the beast together and why he now felt part of it too. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. Eli slept deeply, no longer curled in fear, but stretched out like he finally believed the danger was past. Harold watched, his heart heavier than it had been in years but also warmer. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the start of something neither of them could name yet, something ancient, something sacred. In the darkness, Harold whispered a promise, not just to Eli but to whatever force had tied them together. No one's talking you away. Not while I still breathe. And somewhere beyond the trees, a silver eye blinked in the dark, watching, waiting, protecting. The next morning, Harold was already awake when the sunlight began to crawl across the wooden floorboards. He hadn't slept much, not because of worrying, but because something in his gut told him the quiet wouldn't last. Eli stirred on the couch, his small frame still wrapped in the old wool blanket. Henry the teddy bear clutched tight under his chin. Harold sat in the kitchen, reading the same newspaper 3 times without absorbing a word. Outside, the snow had stopped, but a bitter wind still howled through the branches. The Wolf hadn't returned, or at least, Harold hadn't seen him. And yet, the sense of being watched never left. As Harold sipped his coffee, he heard footsteps behind him. Eli stood in the doorway, his eyes still foggy with sleep. "Do I have to leave today?" he asked. Harold didn't answer right away. He set down his mug and motioned for Eli to sit at the table. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, all right, but folks are gonna come by. Maybe some questions, maybe some papers to sign." Eli looked down at the table, fiddling with the button on his shirt. "Will they take me back to the man?" The fear in his voice was sharp, clean like the crack of dry wood in a fire. Harold leaned forward, steady but firm. "Not if I can help it." Eli nodded once, then returned to silence. His silence wasn't empty, it was a dam, holding back a flood. Harold recognized it. He'd seen that silence in himself after Martha died. Not grieving out loud didn't mean you weren't hurting. By mid-morning, a woman from social services arrived, a tall, serious woman in a green parka named Miss Johansson. She spoke with the tone of someone who'd seen too many cases and tried not to feel too much. "He doesn't match any current reports," she said, flipping through the clipboard in her gloved hands. "No missing persons in the last 6 months that fit this profile." "It's possible he was off-grid." Harold raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean, off-grid?" She shrugged. "Some families don't register births, living out in cabins. No school, no doctors. The ones who don't want to be found." Harold clenched his jaw. "Or the ones hiding something." Miss Johansson nodded grimly. "That too." She looked at Eli, who peeked around the doorframe like a nervous animal. Miss Johansson tried to coax Eli into speaking, asking gently about his name, his home, any siblings. Eli barely whispered. He stayed close to Harold's side, shrinking every time she used a formal voice. Finally, she turned to Harold. "If he doesn't speak more, we'll have to bring him in for an evaluation. Legally, he can't stay here indefinitely." Harold felt the words land like ice in his gut. "You saying I can't take care of him?" she sighed. "Not saying that. But there are rules, background checks, foster certifications, home visits." Harold nodded slowly. "And in the meantime." She paused. "In the meantime, it's your call. But we'll have to make a decision soon." Harold looked down at Eli, who was now clinging to his coat. The boy didn't need rules, he needed safety. Later that day, after Miss Johansson left with a promise to follow up soon, Harold took Eli out to the woodshed to stack firewood. It wasn't about chores, it was about distraction. About giving the boy something to do with his hands besides tremble. As they carried logs back and forth, Eli suddenly asked, "Why don't you have pictures in your house?" Harold blinked, then looked down. "Used to. After my wife passed, I took them down." Felt like staring at ghosts. Eli nodded like he understood, which broke Harold's heart even more. A 5-year-old should be thinking about dinosaurs and cartoons, not ghosts. They worked in silence until Eli asked, "Do ghosts come back if you remember them?" Harold swallowed. "Sometimes. But not to hurt you, just to remind you who you are." That night, while Harold was chopping carrots for soup, Eli stood at the window like he was expecting something. Then he whispered, "He's back." Harold looked up sharply. Outside, in the dusk, the silver wolf had returned. He stood at the edge of the tree line again, perfectly still. "What does he want?" Harold asked. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he walked outside barefoot before Harold could stop him. Harold dropped the knife and rushed out, wrapping a coat around the boy's shoulders. But the child didn't flinch. He walked toward the wolf, just a few steps, and whispered something Harold couldn't hear. The wolf blinked slowly, then turned and vanished into the trees. Eli stood there in the cold, quiet and calm. "He says someone's coming." Harold pulled Eli back inside and bolted the door. He didn't know whether to believe the boy or not, but something in his voice sounded like certainty, not fantasy. That night, Harold didn't light the lamps. He kept the house dark and quiet, watching through the window, one hand resting near the old hunting rifle he kept by the door. Just after midnight, a truck drove slowly past the edge of the property, too slow to be casual. No headlights, no sound but tires on ice. Then it disappeared. Harold's breath was shallow. He didn't tell Eli, didn't want to add more fear. But he stayed awake all night again, listening, waiting, remembering the wolf's warning. The next morning, Harold called Sheriff Gable again. "We had a visitor last night," he said. The sheriff didn't hesitate. "You armed?" "Always. Keep it that way. I'll stop by later." When Harold hung up, he found Eli drawing with a piece of charcoal on a brown paper bag. The image stopped him cold. It was a crude figure, a tall man with dark eyes, standing over a smaller child. And behind them, a silver wolf with fangs bared. "Who is that?" Harold asked. Eli didn't look up. "The man who used to hurt me, but the wolf wouldn't let him this time." Harold took the drawing and folded it gently. "Can I keep this?" Eli nodded. "He'll be mad if he knows I told. But I think the wolf will come back." By mid-afternoon, Miss Johansson returned with news. "We might have something," she said, eyes wide with unease. "A missing persons case from 3 years ago. No confirmed photos, but details match. Boy, age 2, disappeared from a backwoods commune in Montana. No birth certificate. Mother claimed the child was chosen by the forest and refused to give details. Authorities dropped it when the group disbanded and no one pressed charges." Harold was stunned. "So what? They just forgot him?" Johansson looked sick. "More like no one fought for him." Harold clenched his fists. Eli was playing quietly by the fire, unaware that strangers were discussing his stolen past. Harold knew in that moment, no one was taking him away again. That night, Harold packed a duffel bag with essentials: blankets, food, matches, and a flashlight. He wasn't running. Not yet. But something in him needed to be ready, just in case. Eli watched from the doorway, silent as always. "Are we leaving?" he asked. Harold zipped the bag slowly, then shook his head. "No, but we're staying ready." Eli nodded like he understood more than a child should. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch scratched across the window like a warning. Harold placed the duffel near the door and poured 2 cups of warm milk. "Drink this, then rest. We'll be all right." But even as he said it, the storm inside him raged. How could he protect this boy from the world, from the law, from whatever evil had abandoned him? The sheriff arrived just after sundown. He stepped inside with his hat in hand, face grave. "I've been thinking," he began. "This whole thing don't sit right. We might be dealing with something bigger than abandonment." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Gable glanced at Eli, then lowered his voice. "Trafficking, maybe. Underground stuff. The kind of thing that don't make the papers. If that truck last night was scouting, they might come back." Harold's stomach turned. "What do we do?" The sheriff sighed. "Legally, I should take the boy to child services for his safety. But morally," he looked Harold in the eyes. "You're the only person he trusts. That matters." The weight of those words hit Harold like a stone. Eli approached them, holding the folded drawing of the wolf and the dark-eyed man. He handed it to the sheriff with trembling hands. "That's him. He used to lock me in a box under the stairs. Said the forest would forget me." The room went still. Gable took the paper carefully, his face tightening. "I've seen monsters before," he said. "But this is evil." He looked at Harold. "If you're willing to keep him here, I can fudge the paperwork. Say we lost track for a few days while we sort it out. But if you're all in, this won't be easy. There'll be eyes on you, questions, and maybe worse." Harold didn't hesitate. "I'm in." That decision changed everything. The next morning, Harold called his daughter, May, for the first time in weeks. She picked up on the second ring, surprised. "Dad, everything okay?" He hesitated, then said, "I've taken in a boy. Name's Eli. Long story, but he needs help." There was a long pause on the line. "You adopted someone," she said slowly, "not officially, but he's here. And I think he's been through more than either of us can imagine." May didn't answer for a while. Then, "Is this about Mom?" Harold blinked. "No, maybe. I don't know. But this boy needs someone." And I think I need him too. May exhaled softly. All right. Tell me how I can help. That night, Eli had his first real bath since arriving. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch at the water. He just sat there, small and quiet, as Harold gently scrubbed the dirt from his back. The scars were clearer now, lines that spoke of pain and punishment, not accidents. Harold's hands trembled as he rinsed the boy's hair. No one's gonna hurt you here, he whispered. Not ever again. Eli looked up with eyes wide and wet. You don't even know me, he said. Why are you doing this? Harold paused. Because someone didn't. And I won't let that happen again. The boy reached out and touched his hand. It wasn't gratitude. It was trust. Later, as Eli slept, Harold stood on the porch with his shotgun resting against the railing. The snow was falling again, thick and slow. The forest was silent. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The silver wolf had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. A second wolf stood beside him, a smaller, younger one, dark-furred and alert. Harold watched in awe as the two creatures stared back at him. Then the silver wolf stepped forward and howled a long, low cry that echoed through the trees. It wasn't a threat, it was a call. A message, a promise. Harold nodded once. I hear you, he whispered. He's ours now. 2 days later, Child Services officially listed Eli as temporarily placed with a guardian pending investigation. It wasn't custody, but it gave Harold time. Time to rebuild, time to learn who this child really was. And in that time, something remarkable happened. Eli laughed. It was small at first, a startled giggle when Harold burned the toast, or when the old radio played a silly song. But it grew. He started asking questions. He drew pictures. He even asked about Martha, and Harold showed him photos. She looks kind, Eli said. She was, Harold replied. She would have liked you, and somehow, Harold felt her presence again, not in grief, but in warmth. The townsfolk started whispering. Some said Harold had gone soft. Others said he was losing it. But a few, especially the older ones, understood. They remembered him from his youth, raising May alone, when Martha had her first cancer scare. They remembered his strength, his silence, his loyalty, and they saw it again now. In the grocery store, old Mr. Langston said, saw that boy with you. Brave thing you're doing. Harold didn't need praise. But the quiet nods helped. He wasn't alone in this. Even the sheriff, despite his warnings, dropped off an extra bag of groceries. In case the little one's picky, he said with a wink. Harold thanked him without words. On the 5th night, Eli had a nightmare. Screams, crying. He woke up thrashing. Harold rushed to the couch and held him close. It's just a dream, he whispered. You're safe. You're home. Eli sobbed into his chest for a long time before falling asleep again. Harold didn't let go. He stayed awake the rest of the night, rocking gently, like he used to with May when she was sick. He didn't know what kind of therapy Eli needed. He didn't know if the state would let him keep him forever. But in that moment, nothing mattered except the rise and fall of the boy's breath. The weight of his small body, the pulse of life against his chest. At dawn, as light filtered through the frosted glass, Harold made a silent vow. He would fight for Eli, not just against the law or the past, but against whatever darkness still lived in that boy's memories. This wasn't charity, this was redemption. His own as much as Eli's. As he stepped outside into the pale light, the snow crunching beneath his boots, he saw the silver wolf again, alone this time, standing like a guardian beneath the trees. Their eyes met, and in that silence, Harold felt it clear as day. He wasn't just protecting a boy. He was being watched over, too. By something wild, something ancient, something just. It started with small changes hardly noticeable to an outsider, but monumental in a house that had known only grief and silence. One morning, Harold found Eli humming while brushing his teeth. It wasn't a song Harold recognized, but the melody was soft and curious, like a bird learning to sing after winter. That same day, the boy asked to help make breakfast. His hands were clumsy with the eggs, and half the shells ended up in the pan, but Harold didn't care. He stood behind him, guiding gently, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. You're a natural, he said. Eli grinned, a crooked, gap-toothed grin that looked exactly like childhood should. They built routines. Morning walks to check the traps Harold never used anymore, hot cocoa after dinner, puzzles by the fire. Eli slept better now. Not every night, some nights the fear still clawed its way back, but when it did, he didn't face it alone. Harold was always there. One night, Eli left a drawing on Harold's pillow. It showed the two of them standing in front of the cabin, hand in hand, with the silver wolf watching from the trees. At the bottom, in shaky letters, Eli had written, "Me and you are a pack now." Harold stared at it for a long time before folding it into his wallet, placing it beside a photo of Martha. It was the first time he'd added anything new to that wallet in over a decade. May, Harold's daughter, came to visit the following week. She brought groceries and a box of children's books from her own son, who had outgrown them. At first, she was stiff and certain, but the moment she saw Eli run to greet Harold at the gate, arms open, she softened. "He calls you Papa yet?" she asked gently. Harold shook his head. "No, but he doesn't flinch when I hug him. That's enough for now." May knelt down and offered Eli a smile. "Hi there. I'm May." Eli looked at Harold for permission, then shyly waved. Over the next few hours, she watched them, watched the quiet understanding, the easy rhythm between them, and finally said, "I get it now, Dad. He's not just a kid you found. He's part of you." The sheriff returned with news. "Got a hit on a license plate," he said. "That truck you saw belongs to a man named Victor Lane." Names popped up in a few investigations, nothing stuck. But he's been tied to missing kids, cult activity, even suspected trafficking. Harold felt his blood turn to ice. "So what do we do?" Gable frowned. "Right now, we wait. But if Lane comes back into town, we'll be ready." He handed Harold a file with old reports. "Keep this somewhere safe. And keep your eyes open." That night, Harold locked every door and placed the shotgun beside the bed. He didn't tell Eli, but he kept his ear tuned to every creak and rustle outside. Despite the looming threat, life inside the cabin continued to grow brighter. Eli started calling the wolf Silver, and even left scraps of meat near the tree line. Some mornings, the meat would be gone, others, it remained untouched. But Harold noticed something stranger: paw prints circling the cabin, often after snowfall, never threatening, just present, watching, guarding. One night, Harold stepped outside and whispered, "Thank you," into the darkness. He didn't expect an answer. But somewhere far off, a howl rose through the night, low, deep, steady. Not alone. A chorus joined it. The forest wasn't empty. It never had been. Word spread in town, as it always does. Some folks called Harold foolish. Others whispered about that wild boy, but a few came by with casseroles and extra firewood, saying nothing, just nodding. One old widow, Mrs. Koenig, brought a hand-knitted scarf for Eli. "My grandson never wore it," she said, handing it to the boy. "He never made it home from the war. Maybe it'll keep you warm now." Eli thanked her with the softest smile Harold had ever seen. That night, he wore the scarf to bed. "Smells like cookies," he murmured, eyes closing. Harold sat beside him, watching the fire crackle, and felt something he hadn't in years: peace. They took a trip into town one morning, bundled up tight against the cold. Eli clung to Harold's hand as they walked through the hardware store, choosing nails for a new birdhouse. People stared, but no one said a word. At the diner, Harold ordered two pancakes and hot cocoa, and Eli ate like he hadn't seen syrup in months. One waitress leaned in and said quietly, "He looks good." "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Harold nodded. It was more than food or shelter. It was presence, consistency, safety. That afternoon, they returned to the cabin and built the birdhouse together, placing it outside the window. A chickadee landed on it the next day. The true change came one morning when Harold woke to find Eli gone. Panic surged through him like fire. He grabbed his boots, his coat, and sprinted into the snow. But he didn't have to go far. Just beyond the tree line, he found Eli standing beside Silver. The boy didn't look afraid. He looked calm. "He wanted me to see something," Eli said. Behind the valve, half covered in frost, was a pile of fabric, dirty, torn, and unmistakably human. A jacket, children's shoes, a rusted tin lunchbox. Harold recognized the implication before Eli spoke. "That's where he found me." The valve stood guard over the spot, then turned and walked away. Eli followed, but stopped to look back. "He showed me where it ended, so I can remember where it started." Harold didn't ask questions. He carried Eli back home, holding him close. That night, he opened the old trunk in his bedroom, the one filled with Martha's things. He pulled out a quilt she'd sewn years ago, covered in patches from old shirts and baby blankets. He laid it over Eli as he slept, tucking it around his small shoulders. "Now you're part of this place," he whispered. "Part of this family." In his sleep, Eli murmured something Harold couldn't make out. But it didn't matter. The words weren't what mattered. It was the warmth in the room, the breath of safety in the air. The unmistakable truth that, for the first time, Eli felt truly home. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the cabin delivered by hand, no postage, no return address. Harold opened it slowly, instincts on high alert. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 words written in jagged black ink. "He belongs to us. We're coming." No signature. No threat spelled out, but the message was clear. Harold's hands trembled as he folded the note. He didn't tell Eli, not yet. Instead, he stored the paper in the same drawer where he kept the sheriff's file. Then he checked the locks again, reinforced the windows, loaded the rifle. This wasn't just about fear now, it was about preparation and trust. He knew Silver would be watching, but still he was just one man. That evening, Harold told Sheriff Gable about the note. Gable read it, lips pressed tight, jaw clenched. "This is a warning," he said. "They know where you are. And they know he's with you." Harold nodded. "So what now?" The sheriff hesitated, then said, "Now we set a trap." Harold raised an eyebrow. "A trap?" Gable leaned in. "They'll come at night. That's how these people operate, quiet, fast, and dirty. But if we're ready, we can end this." Over the next 3 days, the sheriff coordinated with 2 deputies, trusted men who wouldn't breathe a word. They stayed hidden near the tree line, rifles in hand, radios muted. Every night, Harold tucked Eli in like nothing was different, but everything had changed. The 4th night, just after midnight, a truck rumbled onto the property. Lights off, engine quiet, exactly like before. Harold was waiting at the kitchen window, shotgun loaded, nerves steel tight. Eli slept upstairs, unaware. Silver was nowhere in sight, but Harold felt him out there. The moment the truck doors opened, the trap was sprung. Sheriff Gable and his men emerged from the shadows, shouting commands, guns raised. The man who stepped out of the truck didn't resist. He smiled. "That kind of smile you see in nightmares. He ain't yours," the man said calmly. "He's property." Harold stepped outside, shotgun pointed at the man's chest. "Not anymore," he said. Victor Lane was arrested on the spot. In his truck, they found maps, photographs, notes, details about Eli's life that sent a chill through every officer who saw them. The boy had been monitored for years, watched, conditioned, and then, when he became too unruly, discarded like trash. The sheriff filed federal charges within hours. The FBI got involved. Child trafficking, abuse, conspiracy. Victor refused to talk, but he didn't need to. The evidence spoke volumes. When Harold returned to the cabin, Eli was still asleep, peaceful, safe. He never even heard the commotion. And Harold thanked God for that. Some parts of the past didn't need to be remembered. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Reporters showed up at the edge of town. Neighbors dropped off warm meals and old toys. Even the mayor called Harold to offer support. "You've done something extraordinary," he said. Harold only replied, "I just didn't walk away." Eli, still unaware of the full storm around him, started school part-time at a small church down the road. His teacher said he was quiet, observant, but curious. He drew wolves in the margins of every notebook. Always one large, silver one standing between a boy and the dark. The drawings made the staff uneasy, but Harold understood. It was his way of telling the story as truth, in a language only he and the forest really spoke. One afternoon, Eli came home from school holding a paper crown. "I was the king today," he said proudly. Harold ruffled his hair. "I always knew you were." Eli beamed. Then he whispered, "Do you think Silver knows?" Harold nodded. "He knows everything." That night, Harold placed the paper crown on the fireplace mantel, next to a photo of Martha and the drawing Eli had left him weeks before. He stood there for a long time, looking at the 3 items, past, present, and future, all tied together in this little wooden home. He realized then that Eli hadn't just been saved. He'd saved something in Harold too. Something buried deep, Something called purpose? When spring came, the snow melted in soft waves across the property. Buds appeared on the trees, birds returned, and so did Silver. But this time, he didn't stay at the edge of the woods. He came much closer. One afternoon, Eli stood barefoot on the porch as the wolf approached. Carefully, Harold watched from the doorway, heart in his throat. Silver stopped just a few feet away. Eli knelt, stretched out a hand. The wolf leaned in then, incredibly, touched his nose to the boy's palm. No growl, no fear, just trust, a bridge between wild and human. Then, just as gently, Silver turned and disappeared into the woods for the last time. Eli didn't cry. He didn't ask where Silver was going. He simply stood, hands still outstretched, and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, he told Harold, "I think he came to finish the story. Now I can write my own." Harold didn't have words. He just pulled the boy into his arms and held him tight. That night, they sat by the fire, building a photo album together. The first page held a picture May had taken Eli in the woods, smiling at the camera, the scarf from Mrs. Koenig wrapped tight around his neck. On the second page, Harold placed a photo of the old cabin, snow melting from the roof, a single paw print still visible on the front step. As the days passed, Eli began sleeping through the night. No more terrors, no more murmurs, just sleep, the deep, healing kind. Harold, too, felt a quiet peace settle into his bones. The cabin no longer felt empty. It felt lived in, it felt right. One morning, as they sat on the porch sipping cocoa, Eli asked, "Do you think I'll be like you when I'm old?" Harold chuckled. "God, I hope not. You'll be better." Eli smiled. "But I want to be brave like you." Harold looked out over the trees, his eyes misting. "You already are, son, braver than I ever was." And in that moment, he knew the worst was over. The healing had begun. The forest was still. The shadows had changed. The danger had passed. But something remained, something sacred and unseen. A bond, a memory, a story woven between man, child, and beast. One night, Harold stepped out alone and looked toward the trees. No wolves, no sound, but he spoke anyway. "He's safe now." "You did good." A breeze rustled the branches. A response, a farewell, and Harold smiled. Because some promises are kept in silence. Some legacies live in footprints, not words. And some stories like this one don't end, they just find their home. Spring melted into summer gently that year, as if the world itself wanted to give them space to breathe. The cabin no longer echoed with loneliness. It pulsed with routine, with laughter, with the little messes only a child can make, muddy boots at the door, crayons stuck in couch cushions, cereal spilled on the kitchen floor. Harold didn't mind. He found joy in sweeping up after Eli, in folding small shirts, in packing lunches with uneven peanut butter layers. Every task had purpose. Every day had a rhythm. The silence that once haunted the cabin was now filled with soft music and cartoon dialogue. Even the wind seemed to move differently, no longer howling, just whispering gently through the trees. Eli began to grow quickly. His face filled out, his steps became more confident, and the tremor in his voice faded. He still had nightmares sometimes, but now he knew what to do. He would get up, walk down the hall, and curl up beside Harold on the old couch. No words, just closeness. And Harold never asked questions. Some wounds don't need words to heal, some just need to be held. One morning, Eli said, "I don't remember what his face looks like anymore." Harold paused, unsure if that was a loss or a victory. "That's okay," he said. "You don't need to." Eli nodded, then added, "But I still remember the wolf, and somehow, that felt right." May visited more often now, sometimes bringing her own son, Caleb, who was 2 years older than Eli. At first, Eli was shy, hiding behind Harold's legs, but Caleb was patient. He showed Eli how to ride a bike, how to skip stones across the lake, how to climb trees without scraping your knees too much. The two boys became inseparable, and their laughter rang through the woods like wind chimes. Harold watched them from the porch, a glass of lemonade in hand, a softness in his eyes that no one had seen since Martha's last days. May sat beside him, smiling. She said, "I think Mom would have loved this." Harold didn't speak. He just nodded, blinking back tears. Word about Harold's story spread wider than he expected. A local journalist published an article called "The Boy, the Wolf, and the Man Who Stayed." It went viral. Strangers sent letters, churches sent donations. One woman from Oregon mailed Eli a hand-knitted sweater with a wolf embroidered on the back. A retired school teacher offered to tutor him twice a week via video call. Even a therapist reached out free of charge, offering sessions when Eli was ready. Harold was overwhelmed. He never asked for attention. He just wanted to do right by the boy, but sometimes, doing the right thing quietly makes the loudest echo. And this echo was still spreading. Eventually, the state offered Harold full guardianship. The process took months: paperwork, background checks, home visits, but every social worker who came through the cabin left with the same impression: stability, love, recovery. Harold wasn't perfect. He didn't have a degree. He didn't always say the right things. But he showed up, every day, and that mattered. When the final approval letter arrived, Harold held it for a long time before showing Eli. The boy read the words carefully, lips moving. Then he asked, "So I get to stay forever?" Harold crouched down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You've been staying forever since the day I found you." The cabin itself began to change. Harold fixed the roof, painted the shutters blue, Eli's favorite color. They built a small vegetable garden out back and planted carrots, potatoes, and one stubborn tomato vine that refused to die. They added a bird feeder near the porch, and Eli gave each visitor a name: Bernard the cardinal, Lucky the squirrel, and Junebug, the clumsy robin. But the most important addition was the wooden sign Harold carved by hand and nailed above the front door. It read, "The Den." Below it, 2 initials were burned into the wood. H+. It wasn't just a home now. It was a legacy, a refuge, a place where broken things were made whole. Eli's drawings began to change. The wolves were still there, but now they were playful, resting in the sun, curled beside campfires, running alongside children. The dark figure with hollow eyes vanished from the paper. One day, Eli handed Harold a drawing of 2 wolves, one silver, one black, curled around a sleeping child in a nest of leaves. "They're his parents now," Eli explained, "not the bad man." "The wolves?" Harold studied the image and nodded. "That's a good family," Eli smiled. "The best kind." And for the first time, Harold truly believed that love didn't always come from where you expected it, came from where it was needed most. Occasionally, Harold and Eli would walk to the edge of the forest and just sit in silence. They never saw Silver again. But they didn't need to. The wolf had done his part. He had guided, protected, watched, and then, when the story allowed it, he left. But his presence lingered in the trees, in the hush of the leaves, in the cool stillness of dawn. Sometimes Eli would whisper, "Thank you," to no one in particular. And Harold never interrupted. Some thank yous didn't need explanations. Some were for the soul, for the wild, for the things that never speak but are always listening. The sheriff stopped by one afternoon with his dog, Murphy, a golden retriever with a limp and a big heart. Eli was cautious at first, but Murphy won him over with sloppy kisses and a goofy tail wag. "He's old," Gable said, "but he still protects what matters." Eli looked up. "Like Silver," the sheriff grinned, "exactly like Silver." Murphy started visiting once a week, and Eli would throw sticks while Gable and Harold shared coffee on the porch. "You did good," the sheriff said once, voice low. A lot of men would have turned away. Harold stared into the trees. "I almost did," Gable nodded. "But you didn't. That's what counts." The woods were quiet now, but never empty. Healing had a sound: soft footsteps on pine needles, the creak of old wood, the sigh of wind through leaves. Harold heard it everywhere. Eli did too. Some days, they'd sit together, side by side, and say nothing at all. Other days, Eli would ask impossible questions. "Do you think trees remember people? Can wolves miss us?" Harold never pretended to have the answers. He just listened, held space. And somehow, that was enough, more than enough. Because the world no longer felt cold. It felt alive. And in that life, a boy had found his voice, and a man had found his reason. As autumn rolled in, the forest changed again: golden leaves, crisp air, the scent of pine and earth rising with every step. Harold and Eli took longer walks now, their pace unhurried, their path familiar. They followed the same trail that led to the ridge where Silver had once stood watch. Eli would pause at the same spot, looking out over the valley, and sometimes he'd whisper things Harold couldn't hear. But Harold never asked. Whatever the boy was saying belonged to the trees now. One day, as they sat beneath a red maple, Eli said, "Do you think I'm still part of the wild?" Harold smiled. "You always will be. But now you're also part of home." That same week, Harold received an invitation from the school. Family Day, bring someone special. At first, Eli hesitated. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," he mumbled. Harold looked up from his coffee. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The morning of the event, Harold put on a clean shirt and even combed his hair, something he hadn't bothered with in years. Eli wore his Wolf sweater. At school, kids introduced grandparents, aunts, foster parents. When it was Eli's turn, he pointed to Harold and said proudly, "This is Harold. He's my guardian. He saved me." Some parents looked surprised. Others clapped quietly, but Harold didn't hear any of it. His chest was too full. After the event, a teacher approached Harold in the hallway. "He's different," she said, "not just happy-centered." Like something rooted him. Harold nodded. He's been through more than most adults. But he still believes in good things. The teacher looked moved. "That's rare." As they left, Eli slipped his hand into Harold's without speaking. That small gesture, simple and warm, said everything. On the drive home, Eli leaned back in his seat and said, "I think I want to help animals when I grow up. Maybe rescue them." Harold glanced at him and smiled. "You already did. You rescued me." The boy laughed, light and clear, like wind through high branches. Months passed, and the forest prepared for winter again, but this year, there was no dread. The cabin was ready, the firewood was stacked high. And inside, a family not born but built was stronger than ever. Eli had a bedtime now, a favorite book, a chore chart with stickers. But he also had something deeper: safety, belonging, a sense of future. Harold, in turn, had something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose, not as a father, not exactly. As something older, a protector, a keeper of stories. A man shaped by loss, but not defined by it. He often caught himself smiling at small things: a drawing on the fridge, a note on the counter, the sound of 2 feet running across the floor. One snowy morning, they found paw prints near the porch. Just one set, large, familiar. Eli bent down and pressed his hand beside them. "He came back," he whispered. Harold didn't see the wolf. But he didn't need to. The message was clear. No matter how far time carried them, Silver's watch hadn't ended, it had simply changed form. That night, Eli placed a drawing on the mantel. The cabin, surrounded by snow, with Silver standing in the distance, looking in. Above it, in big bold letters, he'd written, "We are still a pack." Harold stared at the picture for a long time. Then he lit a candle and whispered, "Thank you, old friend." Eli's story eventually reached beyond the town, beyond the state. A foundation was created in his name, the Wild Watch, dedicated to protecting missing children and wildlife sanctuaries alike. Harold didn't want the attention, but he allowed his name to be used. "If it helps someone else," he said, "then it's worth it." The first billboard showed a silhouette of a wolf and a boy beneath the stars. The caption read, "Sometimes the wild doesn't take, it gives." Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up. Children were found. Forests were preserved. And somewhere in the trees, a legacy howled softly into the wind. The cabin became a place people visited, not in droves, but quietly. Social workers, burned out parents, grieving widows. They came to sit on the porch, to walk through the woods, to see the birdhouse, the garden, the mantel with its drawings and photographs. Harold welcomed them with coffee and silence, knowing that sometimes, what people need most isn't advice, it's presence. Eli would greet them with shy smiles, offer them biscuits, tell them stories of the wolf who saved him. But he never spoke about the man with the dark eyes. That part of his story was over, buried, not forgotten but no longer holding power. On the second anniversary of Eli's rescue, they returned to the spot where it all began. Snow covered the road. The trees stood tall and silent. Eli walked a few paces ahead, then stopped. "It doesn't feel scary anymore," he said. "It feels like a beginning." Harold stood beside him, heart full. That's what it was. Eli reached down and placed a small wooden carving in the snow of wolf, carefully shaped by Harold's hands. Then he whispered, "Thank you for watching me." The wind stirred gently, lifting snowflakes into the air like a soft applause. No wolves appeared. but the feeling was unmistakable. They were not alone. That night, back at the cabin, Harold placed a new frame on the wall. Inside it was the first note he'd ever received from Eli, written in block letters during a tutoring session. It read, "Dear Harold, I know you're not my real dad. But I think maybe you're more. You stayed." Harold stared at the words until the firelight blurred them with tears. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just sat in his chair, the boy asleep nearby, and let the silence say the rest. He thought of Martha, of Silver, of everything that led to this exact moment. A journey that began with a cry in the woods ... and led to love. And so it ends not with a goodbye, but with a promise carried on the wind and carved into wood. A child who learned to trust, a man who learned to feel again, and a wolf who reminded them both that sometimes the fiercest protectors come in fear and silence. The world didn't change overnight, but for two souls in a cabin by the woods, everything did. What began as survival became something sacred. And in the quiet heart of winter, with snow falling gently outside and the fire glowing within, one truth remained undeniable. He didn't just save a boy, he found himself.